Vampires. They're creatures who have kind of waned in popularity in recent years. Sure, there are plenty of movies, books, and video games about them. I mean, obviously, there was a huge boom of interest in the late 90s with video games like Blood Rain, movies like Van Helsing and Underworld, and again in the 2010s with the Twilight novels and TV series like True Blood keeping it going, but also kind of contributing to that wane in popularity. Do not get me started on the Werepanthers. Now, even though it's lost some steam, it seems that there's starting to be another interest in vampires starting. I mean, we have the new Vampire the Masquerade coming out, we just had the conclusion of the Castlevania series on Netflix, and Resident Evil Village has kind of reinvigorated that interest in vampires. However, I kind of think that there's only so much you can do with vampires in a modern setting, or even an ancient setting. Everybody knows about them, everybody knows their powers and weaknesses, blah blah blah, whatever, Dracula, we know you want to suck the blood, big deal! But recently I've been introduced to the Legacy of Kain video game series, and I've become deeply fascinated and engrossed in this world and lore surrounding vampires. Suddenly, they're not just some creatures stalking in the night or some weird goth guy with long black hair and long black fingernails hanging out at some seedy bar in some vice-filled neighborhood in some major metropolitan area. Instead, they're kings, they're rulers, they have clans and entire cultures surrounding them. They seek order and they want to bring peace to an otherwise dying landscape. So allow me to take you on a trip through the land of Nosgoth as I review my first introduction to the series, The Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. The Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver is a 1999 Gothic vampire action-adventure game and the second entry into the Legacy of Kain series developed by Crystal Dynamics, the same folks that made Gex, and who are currently working on the Tomb Raider series for Square Enix. Now, before I go over the story of Soul Reaver, I have to talk about the ending of the Legacy of Kain Blood Omen. Not to worry though, you don't have to play Blood Omen in order to enjoy Soul Reaver, but it does establish the character of Kain a bit better and does set the tone for the rest of the series. I just wanted to warn you before I spoil a 25-year-old PS1 game. But anyway, in Blood Omen you play as Kain, a noble lord turned into a vampire who lives in a land called Nosgoth. In Nosgoth, there are 9 sacred magic pillars that keep balance and control the health and well-being of the land. Each of the pillars are protected by a guardian, however, in Kain's time, they all go insane. Kain is then tasked with killing all of them so that new guardians can be called to the task. However, in his quest to restore the pillars and kill all these guardians, Kain discovers that he is actually the last guardian of the pillars, and he was called when the original guardian was killed due to madness. Meanwhile, a giant crusade against vampires is going on, and most of the vampires in Nosgoth are killed, except for Kain. Therefore, at the end of Blood Omen, Kain has a choice. He can either kill himself, restoring the pillars and bringing about the health of Nosgoth, but also bringing about the extinction of the entire vampire race, or he can remain alive and rule over a dying and decaying Nosgoth as a vampire king. Now, I know that was a lot of backstory, but I wanted you to know because Soul Reaver takes the latter option. Kain doesn't kill himself and instead decides to rule over Nosgoth himself, with Soul Reaver taking place 1,500 years into the future. Here we discover that vampires slowly evolve over time, with Kain becoming more divine, so to speak. However, not only has Kain evolved as well, but many of his vampire lieutenants that he resurrected many centuries ago have evolved. For instance, the first vampire lieutenant that Kain made, and the main protagonist of this game, Raziel, shows Kain that he's actually grown some wings on his back. However, Raziel doesn't know that his wings are going to end up like some KFC chicken strips. Raziel is tossed into a swirling abyss of water and wakes up many years later, now a wraith with a hunger for souls, and with the help of an ancient cephalopod-like being known as the Elder God, he swears revenge on Kain and his vampire brothers for consigning him to damnation for seemingly no reason. Now, even with that long introduction to the story of Soul Reaver, I have a lot more to say about this game in terms of its acting, aesthetics, mechanics, and its overall presentation. So, let me break it down for you. What? What are you looking at me like that for? I thought it was funny. Anywho, you'll be hard-pressed to find a Legacy of Kain fan who doesn't think the writing in this game is simply fantastic. The plot of Soul Reaver, while a little simple in terms of the main character's motivations and what little it contributes to the overarching plot of the series, is still interesting. The team at Crystal Dynamics was very much inspired by biblical scriptures and the works of William Shakespeare. This is very much reflected in the dialogue of the characters throughout the game. They all talk with a certain amount of solemnity and dignity.
My God! The sanctuary of the clans reduced to ruin. Beyond these walls lay the pillars of Nosgoth, the seat of Kain's empire. How humble it now appeared, collapsing into the dust of its former magnificence. And yet, I had only just emerged. In the instant between my execution and resurrection, centuries had apparently passed.
And, speaking of voices, the stellar cast of voice actors breathes life into this already fantastic writing. You have voice actors like Michael Bell as Raziel, who does a fantastic job with his slightly British, deep, and barely raspy voice. It's interesting to see the guy who played Chaz Finster in Rugrats play a significantly darker role.
What madness is this? What pitiful form is this that I have come to inhabit? Death would be a release next to this travesty.
Also, Simon Templeman reprises his role as Kain, and he does a really fantastic job in this game as well. He sounds a lot older and a lot wiser, but he still retains that kind of anger, arrogance, and regality from the original Blood Omen.
Conscience? You dare to speak to me of conscience? Only when you have felt the full gravity of choice should you dare question my judgment. Your lifespan is a flicker compared to the mass of doubt and regret that I have borne since Mortanius first turned me from the light. To know that the fate of the world hangs dependent on the advisedness of my every deed. Can you even begin to conceive what action you would take in my position?
And, of course, you have the deep, booming voice of the late, great Tony J as the Elder God, watching you every step of the way.
Redeem yourself. Or if you prefer, avenge yourself. Settle your dispute with Kain. Destroy him and your brethren. Free their souls and let the wheel of fate churn again. Use your hatred to reave their souls. I can make it possible. Become my Soul Reaver, my angel of death.
I find the VA's performances in this game to be utterly captivating. Even though I do not skip any cutscenes. I just like hearing them speak. Finally, the aesthetics of Soul Reaver are really cool. I love the combination of Middle Eastern and European medieval architecture, art, and even the music. The music in question was composed by Kirk Harland of Information Society, and instead of going with a more classical approach, it's more of a combination of synthwave and more medieval style music. I really love the main theme of this game too, Ozar Midrashim. It reflects that kind of style. Just this sweeping synth music combined with medieval chanting. That's good right there. All of it really helps to create such a unique and enthralling atmosphere and soundtrack for the game, complementing these derelict cathedrals, flooded abbeys, and empty tombs. All of these aesthetics are then warped and almost given an aquatic feeling when you change dimensions into the spectral realm, which at the time was extremely revolutionary and is still praised to this day. All in all, I really love the visuals, the music, and the influences on this game. Now, while the aesthetics, voice acting, and narrative of the game are generally excellent, when it comes to the actual gameplay, Soul Reaver is rather lacking. The combat in the game is very uninteresting and at times can be very tedious. In order to kill your enemy, you have to either impale them, throw them in water, throw them in fire, or throw them in sunlight. While I understand they're trying to keep with the tradition of killing vampires in only specific circumstances, unless you have a spear, are near fire, are near water, or are near sunlight in the game, it renders these enemies virtually unkillable. Generally, the game is pretty good at putting the necessary killing supplies near you when enemies are nearby, but other times they don't. Also, when you die, you get sent to the spectral realm, and anything you're holding in the material realm, like a spear, is left behind, which is especially bothersome when you have to go between grates and you can't take weapons with you. Sure, in the early portion of the game you get the Soul Reaver, but considering that it goes away with only a little bit of your health drained and doesn't come back unless you restore yourself, it's not completely reliable. Ultimately, it's much more sensible to avoid enemies unless the game forces you to fight them in order to progress. Additionally, the platforming is not very solid in this game. Many times I found myself taking big leaps of faith only to fall and die and go all the way back to where I started. Additionally, in the Drowned Abbey portion of the game, the platforms you have to jump to are extremely small, and jumping is so imprecise. I kept finding myself landing a jump, then falling down. Plus, it doesn't help that the camera doesn't follow you around and will swing in weird directions. I guess this is what we get when you code a vampire game in the same engine as Gex 3. And no, I'm not kidding about that. That's literally what they did.
You are now being so connected, baby.
Finally, while I appreciate that this game was going for a big open world to explore, I would have really appreciated the inclusion of a map or a compass or something on your HUD in the game to give you a sense of direction. There are many times when I felt completely lost on what area to go to. Luckily, you can talk to the Elder God and Ariel about where to go, but all they'll say is things like, "Your brother's domain lies to the north," to which you'll ultimately respond, "Alright."
Where's north from here?
I wanted some sense of direction to be given in the game, but when I first played it, I checked the menu, no map. I checked the instruction book, no map. I even bought the Prima strategy guide for this game, no map. Luckily, thanks to the fantastic efforts of fans online, we have a map available, which even includes warp locations and everything. It just seems odd that the game would give me very specific directions of where to go, but not give me anything to indicate that I know where I'm going. All this does is make players confused, and for me, it made me put down the game for a very long time before returning to it. The Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, while filled with many flaws, has lots to offer in terms of aesthetics, narrative, voice acting, and themes. I really enjoyed the game personally, but due to these other mechanical elements, it kind of makes the game a hard sell to anyone who doesn't already have an interest in the Legacy of Kain series. If you'd like a recommendation for a game in the series that is more action-oriented and probably the most polished with the most interesting gameplay, and also has a great narrative, I definitely recommend Legacy of Kain Defiance. It's just a shame that that's the last game in the series. Anyway, folks, I gotta go reave some souls in the spectral realm. I'll see y'all later.